It's my electric personality. Or my bad memory, I can't remember which. What are you doing here? What are you doing here, Elijah? You know, I think to myself, what am I doing here? Why am I here? I love the creation story. You know, it talks about how a loving father goes out and builds a safe, beautiful, comfortable home for his soon coming children. You know, whenever you're about to have a child, you do all this preparation work beforehand. But, you may build a crib, you may build a new room or something, but I don't think any of us have had to build a whole planet with trees, with forests, with rivers, with oceans. He planned everything for his new family, for us. The temperature extremes, Bobby was talking about, 27 below last night. And, the hot temperatures, I grew up in central Washington, and when I went back, I couldn't believe how hot it was. It was like 135 in the shade, and it just about killed me because I hadn't been home for the summers for very long, in a long, long time. The days and the nights, most of us work during the days and sleep during the nights, but for some it's actually reversed. But he knew how long to make each of them so that we would get our rest. The seasons, up here in the wintertime, it seems like sometimes we work harder trying to stay alive, trying to keep the snow plowed, the wood cut, the stove burning, than we do in the summer when we're scurrying around like ants preparing for the winter. One thing we don't think about very much, there's this force that he somehow incorporated into things. So when we run up and jump, we don't go shooting off into space. Something that keeps our feet on the ground is a thing called gravity. Who would have thought you would need something like that? God. The earth, the spin. We spin around this way and then we go around the sun in a big loop. And that's kind of what causes our gravity, supposedly. But, if we get too far away from the sun, we get cold and then we freeze to death. We get too close, we become like a piece of bacon in a skillet. It's not a pleasant thought. And how about water? Every living thing needs water. There's no two ways about it. Now, the ways you get the water differs from species to species, from animals to plants, humans, and, if we didn't have water, if we were able to walk around at all, we'd probably smell kind of bad. The heavenly bodies. We use the North Star quite a bit up here, to see where we're at, kind of. And when Breen and I were out in Mexico, we were out there for about 3 weeks. And one day I got up in about 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning, I can't remember the exact time. And I could hear the ocean coming in. And it's, we don't have an ocean here in Fairbanks, do we? At least not that I'm aware of. I mean, we have the Yukon and the Tanana, but those, as big as they are, I didn't say the Tinanos, as big as they are, they're not the ocean. And you can hear it coming in and you can hear it coming out, and it's making it's almost like breathing. The planet is breathing through the oceans, and it's true. But I got up and everything was just so strange. It was too warm. Even in the room that was kind of air conditioned, the air conditioner would be humming. And I got up and I walked around, and it was a totally foreign environment. The grass was too well manicured. They had lights on everywhere, so if you got up in the middle of the night, you could see where you were going. And I was just missing home, really missing home. Even though I was glad to be there with Bernita, and I was glad she wasn't there alone, I was really missing, Alaska. And I'm looking out over the ocean and see the the waves kind of coming in because they're, white, and the foam, and they're coming in and they're hitting this thing and they're going back out again. And as I'm sitting there looking, I look up and I see the Big Dipper. And I see the North Star. And I see Orion. And then I move in. God planned for everything. He even planned for the failure of our great grandparents. The plan of salvation is older than the earth itself. Why are we here? God has a plan for everything. And in a roundabout way, that's why we're here. I think of Joseph. Anybody know much about Joseph? He had brothers that wanted him out of the house, and so they sold him into slavery. He ended up in Egypt. He was working for one of the captains of Pharaoh. He ended up going to jail for a crime he didn't commit. He ended up talking to a baker and a cup holder. And he told them what was going to happen to him. And he asked them to please remember him while they were out of jail, and he was in prison, actually. But the baker didn't remember him for very long because he lost his life. Now, the cupbearer forgot all about him as soon as he was given the Pharaoh back his cup. But something came up. Pharaoh had a dream because God had a plan. And so the cupbearer talked to Pharaoh and said, I know a man who can tell you what your dream is. And so they had him cleaned up, because you couldn't bring a guy like that before Pharaoh, cleaned up, brought in, and I imagine it was the captain that he had worked for, who had him put in prison instead of being killed, that actually went out and got him, and brought him before Pharaoh. That's what I like to think. And so he tells Pharaoh what his dream means. And Pharaoh thinks about it, and he thinks about it, and he says, is there a wiser man to put this into effect? And he has the ear of God, and God speaks to him. And that changed everything for the Israelites, because they, after the flood, not the flood, the famine. I have trouble with my F word sometimes. After the famine came, they came and they were buying grain from Joseph, and he pulled that, you could call it a dirty little trick, couldn't you, on his brothers. But basically it was to see if they had changed or if they were the same people they had been before. And they had changed. The years had actually opened their hearts up. And so he had them come live there, and Pharaoh gave them the best land that was available, and that's where they lived. As they became too numerous, the other pharaohs had kind of forgotten about Joseph. And there was a new pharaoh on the throne, probably several generations past. And this baby was born, and because there was a decree that all the male children had to be tossed into the river, this mother hid him for a while, and then when he got too big, she put him in a little basket, and he floated down the river. God had a plan again. And the daughter of Pharaoh, or sister, anyway, a princess came and pulled him out of the water, or had her servants pull him out of the water, and she called him Moses because she'd taken him from the water. And Moses grew up in Pharaoh's house, and he left and became a follower of God. And then he came back, and he said, God says, let my people go. And Pharaoh says, I don't know you, and I don't know your God. He learned about him fairly quickly. And before this was over, Moses was leading the people out of Egypt, and he came to this sea, and Pharaoh just changed his mind, and he was going to wipe them all out or bring them back, whichever they preferred. And Moses held up his stick, the same stick that he'd thrown down and had turned into a snake, his rod. He held it up. And God said, hold it up, and I'll part the seas for you. The seas parted. The Israelites went through the sea. And when they were out, and the Egyptians were chasing God in there, the seas collapsed down. Like cliffs, just kind of come in hard and wipe them out. And in some movies it shows Pharaoh standing there in his chariot, just looking at what's happened to his army. And he just stands there and looks on his chariot for a while, and then he turns around and goes home. His entire military, or most of it anyway, because he came by to get all these Israelites. We think about how they wandered in the desert. How long did they wander? 40 years. They wandered on that desert. Their shoes didn't wear out. They had water to drink. They had food to eat. That's amazing. The most I can get out of a pair of shoes, if I'm really good, if I got really good shoes, is about 5 years. And I don't wear them every day. We think about a lady named Rahab. She was an innkeeper, probably also a prostitute. And the Israelites, when they were going over into Jericho, they sent some spies out. And she knew who these people were because they weren't from her, area. And she said, I will let you out on a rope only if you will save me and my family. And they said yes. And I was looking at pictures of it after, this far back, and there is one part of the outer wall that is still standing. And so I'm looking at that, and the only thing I missed seeing was the scarlet rope hanging off that wall. And Ruth, she wasn't Jewish, but she was dedicated to her Naomi, her mother-in-law. She loved her. God had a plan for her too. Naomi and her husband and 2 sons went to Moab because there was a famine in Israel. And they were there for a while. The boys grew up there. Her husband passed away there. And her sons died too. But they were both married. And Ruth was told by her mother-in-law, Ruth and her sister-in-law were told by her mother-in-law to go find new husbands. And Ruth says, there's no way I'm going to leave you. I'm going to stay with you. And so her mother-in-law tried to get her to stay, but she wouldn't. And she went back with him. And they went back and they were living in her tumble down old house. And she ended up getting married to a very wealthy man. Anybody remember his name? Boaz. And Boaz became father to who became the king, who was the forebearer of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. God had a plan. And you know what? Rahab is in that same lineage of Jesus. I read these stories and it just kind of gives me a little bit of goosebumps, just a few, but they're the good feeling ones. They're not the ones that make me worry about, they're calling up, into my sleeping bag with me when I'm trying to nap. But there's people I have known that have helped to draw me closer to God. And Ruby, Renita's mom, she was one of them. She was very sweet, very kind. And even when she was telling you that you were screwing up, she did it in a very nice way with a polite smile on her face, trying to coax you to see her people. And I didn't get to spend as much time around Bruce as I would have liked to. He was her first husband. He died. And then also I died. And then she married this other guy named Les. And the less we saw Les, the more we... And then we got to know him. And he was a wonderful guy. He was always willing to help. I think of him as old, but he was probably about 72 when he passed away. And I'm not far from there now. But he was always talking to me about, the Lord and doing right and reading my Bible and talking to other people about Jesus. In fact, you couldn't talk to Les for more than 3 minutes before you knew that he loved Jesus and he wanted you to love him too. But there's been other people in my life. There was a medic in the Army, and he got me coming to the church in Fairbanks. And I went there for a while. And then we moved out, and then we came back. And we went there for a while. But God had a plan there. And, we don't know his plans because you know what would happen if he tried to tell us his plans? Our head would explode. And if we didn't, then we need bigger bodies because our heads would be about as big as the universe, I think. But God always has a plan. And Steve Terry talked to me, and Glenn Deanery talked with me, and I became a member of this church. But it's not enough to be a member of this church. Did you know that? If you're not saved by being a member of this church. You're saved by being a follower of Jesus Christ. And what do you do if you're a follower of Jesus Christ? Sorry? Share. Bobby was talking last Sabbath about feed my sheep to Peter. Right? Jesus said, do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Peter says, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus says, feed my sheep. Guess what? Peter's not here anymore. Peter is not here anymore. Peter was immortal and he died. So guess what? Feed my sheep. God has a plan. Feed my sheep. I had a friend. I'd known him for about, before he was a friend, I'd known him for about 5 years. And my boss came to me and he says, I promised Raymond he could go to Vegas, but we don't have the money to do it right now. And I said, no problem. We can do a companion for on my ticket. He says, I was hoping you'd say that. And then he says, we don't have the room thing figured out. I said, we can share a room. He says, I was hoping you'd say that. And I already had a company credit card because I was the manager of the vending site. And he says, just feed yourselves on those and everything will be great. We went down there. Raymond and I finally got to talk because before he would be there at 8 o'clock in the morning at the door waiting to go in. And at 5:01, if you were standing between him and the door, there was going to be footprints up and down your back. Because he was anxious to get out of there. We like motorcycles. We like guns. We had the beginning of a friendship. However, in order for you can't just start something. You can't just start a fire and leave it, right? And unless you're going to burn down the whole forest. But you tend it. You nurture it. And God led me to Raymond. And it was really, really interesting to work with him, to talk with him, to become friends. Before he would, he would do a smile when something was funny, and that was it. It didn't last very long. It wasn't sincere. It wasn't to the core. It was not his whole heart into it. And he was always that way. But he'd start going to lunch with us. And other people noticed it too. My buddy Arnold said, Raymond never became human until you guys went to Vegas. He says, after you guys went to Vegas, he became human. And we'd go to lunch together, we'd do things together, we'd go shooting, just all sorts of things. And, just I would like to think it was by my example, but it wasn't. It was just the fact that he was able to see my love for God and what I was doing with him and with others. And he he developed cancer and he didn't tell me about it for about 3 years. And I knew he had cancer because they'd given him chemo and all his hair had fallen out. And when he came back, he got back even blacker than before he had his cancer. And so, and I'm thinking Raymond in a second. So when he got so weak, I would come and pick him up and help him down the stairs and take him to lunch and then bring him home right after we'd eat. And his body just craved sugar. He would have half a cup of sugar with because of the cancer. But he never told me. And so finally he got so weak, I called up, he couldn't get out of bed. I called up his mom and dad and I said, you guys need to come look at Raymond because I think he's too far gone here to stay here by himself anymore. And they came and they called an ambulance and they transported him to the hospital. And so I went in there to the hospital with him and they checked him in right away. I found out then that he had cancer because the doctor says, we got to get you on a cancer program. And he says, you guys have already told me you can't do anything about it. And so he was there for 3 days and I was going and visiting before about noon. And then I would go in there in the evening and spend a little bit more time with him. And we would talk. And, he would mainly listen because he didn't talk a lot. He was getting. But before that, I had had a chance to talk to him about Jesus. He says to me, you are the best friend that I have ever had. And that about broke my heart. He'd come to the United States when he was 5 years old on an airplane, one of those old propeller tops in the 50s. And one of the engines caught on fire. And he was looking out the window and he saw it catch on fire. And he starts hollering and pointing. And he was only spoke German at that point. And I think he said it was Feuer, Feuer, Feuer. And his mom goes, fire! And everybody tries to get on that side, from the other side of the plane onto this side of the plane to see the fire outside. And the pilot is on the intercom hollering for everybody to sit down. And they did get the flame put out and they managed to land it. And but he was always telling me that story because that was one of the high points of his life. It was really exciting. But he says, you're the best friend I've ever had. And I said, I didn't say anything at that point because I wasn't quite sure how to respond. Because, it made me feel good, but yet it made me feel sad that this was the best he could ever find. Boy, he was in trouble. But the next day I came to pick him up and I said, you remember yesterday you told me I was the best friend you've ever had? And he said, yes. And I said, let me tell you about the best friend. And I told him about Jesus. And when I was about, maybe 1/4 of the way through telling him about Jesus and all the wonderful things he'd done, he pulled up his hand and he says, I believe in Jesus. And I stopped, reassessing. What do I do now? And I said, have you ever given yourself to him to be his child? And he said to me, I don't know how. That's the 3 saddest words I have ever heard. I don't know how. And so I said, Raymond, would you like to? And he said, yes. And so we stopped and we bowed our heads and we prayed and Raymond asked to become his child. And then he was in the hospital. And I was talking to the nurses. I said, he looks really bad. And they said, we don't expect him to make it through the night. Now you have to remember, Raymond, even though he was older than I, he was still a baby in Christ. So I said to him, after I left in the evening, I would come and see him in the evening. I said, after I go home and shower and change, could I come back in and sit with you? And he said, yes. I'll go to the emergency room and have them call us. and we're listening. And so I went home, I ate, showered. They weren't giving Raymond any water anymore. They were just giving more of him. But he would still wake up in moments. And we're sitting there, it's about 12:15 in the evening. Or no, I'm sorry, it was 12 exactly because the nurses came in and they gave him this morphine shot. And I said, he looks really uncomfortable. Is there anything you can do? And she said, yes, I'll go and get the other nurse and we'll readjust him. And they came in and they moved him a little bit, they shifted him and he woke up. And he opens his eyes and he looks at me and he gets this great big grin on his face. It was bigger than his face. Raymond never, ever, ever smiled like that. His whole heart, his whole soul was in it. And I looked at him and I was holding his hand this whole time. And I looked at him and my heart melted because I knew it wasn't me he was seeing. And about 15 minutes later, he hadn't moved or shifted. I looked at him and he wasn't breathing. Felt for a pulse. There was none. And I sat there for a little while left. And then I got up and told the nurses. And one came in and checked his pulse. There was none. She looked up the top. The other one came in. He checked his pulse. He looked at the top. And they looked at me and they said, "Who's on?" I said, "Is it okay if I stay there for the while?" They said, "Yes." And I did. And I was there and I prayed some more and I think for the opportunity that he had given me to serve Jesus. What am I doing here? I'm telling you about things that have touched my heart. They have touched my life. Jesus asks me still today, what are you doing here? Jesus is asking each of you, what are you doing? And then like he said to Peter, he's saying, feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. What are you doing here? What kind of you?